Hello, everybody, and a bit of an interesting episode today. I'm not sure what I'm going to title it, but we're going to talk about the PFL World Championship card. We're going to talk about PFL's acquisition of Bellator, and what that could potentially mean. Obviously, short answer: nobody fully knows. It's got a lot of potential outcomes. And we're going to talk about the UFC Anti Trust because that's a popular topic on MMA social media right now. It's a topic that is got a lot of really dumb takes about it, and we'll get into that. So let's start off with the PFL World Championship card. I'm only really going to look at the tournament finals here and maybe give some thoughts to the other fights because they're not super interesting. At the top of the card, they were going with Clay Collard and Olivier Aubin-Mercier in a lightweight bout, $1 million final on the line. Clay Collard, for those of you who do not remember him from his UFC stint, these are both former UFC fighters. Clay Collard is a actual professional boxer. By MMA standards, he has a pretty well-constructed boxing game. He throws a lot of combinations. Doesn't have necessarily the most absolute fight-stopping power. I think people tend to make a big deal about that kind of thing, but if you look at his fights, went to decision with Shane Burgos, went to decision with Nishikawa, went to decision with Jeremy Stevens, went to decision with Lutterbach, went to decision with Anthony Pettis in 2021. He is not really a finisher in an MMA sense. In fact, he has only one stoppage by strikes in the last 3 years, almost 4 years in MMA. Now, granted, there's a bunch of boxing stoppages in the meantime, but it's against very, very low level competition. Whenever he's run into actually physically durable fighters in MMA, they have been able to take his shots. They've not necessarily been able to beat him, although he does have 10 losses. But they have not. They've been. It's not been. Oh God, you're gonna stand with Clay Collard, you're gonna get banged out right there, boom, boom. It's not an Alex Bahia thing. It's not even like an Israel Adesanya thing. I would say the most common legendary fighter I would probably compare him to is someone like a Marcus Davis. Someone whose boxing was definitely above the average, above the mean for MMA, and Collard's is, but doesn't necessarily have that absolute peak level finishing capabilities. And Mercier, not a good striker. I would definitely not use that word, but he is a comfortable striker. He is a striker who does have some conceptual ideas of defense and whose striking does flow fairly well into what is his A game, which I believe he's a judoka. I should have looked that up, but I believe it's a judo base. But it's a top grappling game. It's control, it's back takes, it's working for chokes. If they are presented, he can submit people. He had a pretty successful UFC run compared to between the two of them. His was much better. Those who do not recall it, he was a finalist on Tough Nations, I think was the season. It was the Canada versus Australia season. He lost to Chad Lapris in the finals, but his UFC run was pretty good. I mean, if we look at it real quickly here, Keelock Jake Lindsay submitted David Mashad, which is a pretty good win looking back. I know Mashad didn't achieve much in the UFC, but not a bad fighter. Beat Tony Sims, lost to Carlos Diego Fea, no problem there. Beat Thibault Gulti, Drew Dober, Anthony Rocco Martin, Evan Dunham, and then had a 3-fight losing streak that got him out of the UFC against Alexander Hernandez, Gilbert Burns, and Arman Saryukin, which, in hindsight, looks pretty amazing. He's been undefeated since. He's beaten everyone that the PFL ranks can throw at him. Marcin Held, Daryl Horcher, Natan Schulte, Rosh Mafio, Alex Martinez, Stevie Ray, Shane Burgos, and then actually two of his weaker wins recently, Anthony Romero and Bruno Miranda, to get to this point. I guess at the end of the day, what I am saying is that I am going to go with Olivier Aubin-Mercier, to be competent enough on the feet to not get knocked out, to be competitive enough that he's going to make Clay Collard have to think about the striking, then work into his high level clinch takedown game, get the job done, get him down. That's the thing, is like Collard has been out wrestled by guys who are not like even good wrestlers. So I don't really see how he deals with somebody who, not a wrestling background, obviously, but somebody who is fairly competent by MMA standards. And I didn't pull up best fight odds before this. So let's pull this up real quick. I'm actually kind of interested in seeing the betting odds. Yeah, they've got Clay Collard at an underdog. I'm seeing plus 220, probably at the high side. Plus 198 is his low side. And then on the Mercier side of things, you're looking at minus 250 to minus 275. Honestly, that could be wider. That's a bettable line on Mercier. I wouldn't touch Collard at those odds. So anyways, that's your new lightweight champion, or I guess second-time lightweight champion, because I'm pretty sure Mercier is the reigning one. Then you got heavyweights, Hanan Ferreira versus Dennis Goldstoff. Goldstoff. Yeah, I was right. Goldstoff is one of the, like, both of these guys are seriously tall. 6'5" versus 6'8". That's an interesting one. Or I guess 6'8", 6'5", because I said Ferreira's name first. I'm going with Hanan Ferreira. I know he's the underdog in this fight. And he's a mess. He's one of those physically imposing fighters who's, beaten guys who are like Maurice Green, Matthias Scheffler. They're not very good. Lost to Antidelgia. Goldstoff is the more solidly formed fighter. Actually, a pretty good fighter, but like not the greatest of like technical ability. Like, he's beaten Yorgan De Castro. That's pretty cool. Yorgan De Castro's not bad. He's beaten Maurice Green. By the way, the idea that Yorgan De Castro and Maurice Green, who were, I believe, both part of like John Jones's killer squad, got in this heavyweight tournament and just like lost, is deeply, deeply satisfying. I can't get around the idea that like there is no way that Goldstoff is super familiar with being at a 7-inch reach disadvantage, 85 inches to 78 inches. He's 3 inches shorter than him. He's smaller than him. He's just like, that's just generally it. He's smaller than him. He's used to being able to weaponize his range and his reach and his size and his frame, and he's just not actually going to be able to do that here. So like, I kind of have to go with Ferreira, who is like I said, pretty good athlete. It's kind of weird that at 6'8" he didn't end up being like a basketball player or something. Like, he's fairly decent. So yeah, I'm gonna go with him. He's the underdog on Tapology, and yeah, he's a 215 to 205, actually 180 underdog or favorite on FanDuel, and then you can get minus 235 to minus 275 on Goldstoff. It's a fight that I think should be closer. Like, it's Goldstoff being presented with somebody who takes his normal weapons, his normal advantages, his normal edges, and turns them against him. And that's just what I got to go with. I mean, I'm not going to be surprised either way. It's heavyweight MMA, people. It can go either way. This is a division where, like, just like being super durable and being able to take big punches, because everyone's a big hitter, is really the dynamic and the meta. But I do, at the end of the day, go with Ferreira to win by TKO. But we'll see. It's a fun little fight. Further on down, we get to Larissa Pacheco versus Marina Manaktina. I always struggle with her name, and I don't really know why. Pacheco. Larissa Pacheco is someone who I'm going to be picking. There are essentially two women that I will pick over her in the PFL space. There's Kayla Harrison, who she did beat last time out, so even that's a competitive fight. But I probably would still pick Harrison. And Cyborg. That's it. No one else like has the physicality to fight with her. Nor the technique. Like, it's not even just a physical thing. It's like, you look at Marina. I'm just gonna go with Marina. And like, realistically speaking, she's not a featherweight. It's like what it comes down to. And you look at it, her wins are over like people who are just like have one gigantic flaw that she can capitalize on. And Pacheco is actually pretty well rounded. She can strike, she can grapple, she's strong, she's durable. She has like game planning. It took her a while to find a way to beat Kayla Harrison, but she got there. And I've got to go. I've got to go Pacheco, 100%. It could go the distance, I guess. Pacheco's not. Pacheco is a finisher, but like she's not. What's the word I'm looking for here? She will fight to a game plan and a breakdown and a smart, risk adverse path. Although she has had two back-to-back TKO/KOs in the last two fights within a minute combined, 59 seconds combined. So maybe that's coming to an end. But yeah, I'll go with TKO. But this is just not really anything Marina offers. I imagine the odds are. Yeah, the odds are ludicrous. We're in that outside of FanDuel, who has Pacheco at only minus 650 to plus 400 on Marina. I guess you could, if you're gonna bet on this fight, go bet there on Pacheco. I would not. I would stay away from betting on Marina. Just period. Again, usual spiel. If you bet on these fights, be ready to lose. Like MMA is an inherently unpredictable sport. If you're betting, you better damn well be ready to lose that money. I'm not saying you will. I generally don't. But remember that and bet accordingly. And that's why I probably wouldn't touch this fight. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it's part of a parlay. Magomed Kiramov versus Sadabusi. Magomed Kiramov is the best welterweight in the PFL. And yeah. He's not as tall or as long as Sadabusi. Sadabusi is insane. 6'3" welterweight, 80-inch reach. That's, that takes some getting used to. That takes some weirdness. But I believe Magomed Kiramov here is going to have the better boxing, the better wrestling, etc. Sadabusi is, if you can get past the reach, there's not a lot there. And don't get me wrong, some fairly solid fighters have not gotten around that reach. Carlos Leal twice, Delano Taylor, Rory McDonald, but who has? Magomed Kiramov back in 2021, beat him by unanimous decision. So there you go. I'm basically looking for a similar outing to that because it's not like Sadabusi has really evolved or changed with the times. It's not like Magomed Kiramov has either, but like I think he's a sharper version of what he was. And I am legitimately surprised that you can get Magomed Kiramov across the board at under minus 200. Minus 165 to minus 175. I am all over that line. And I would not touch Sadabusi at a slight underdog odds of like plus 134 to plus 145. Would not touch it. Magomed Kiramov is a lively option. I am much more interested in the 205 bout between Josh Silvara, who's been very, very good and done some very, very cool things, against Impa Kasanganay, who is really athletic and seems to have kind of really found himself here at 205, even though I think he's too small. Like he's 5'11". He should be down at middleweight. And I get it, obviously. PFL is not doing a middleweight tournament right now. So, like, what are you going to do? All that fun. When it comes down to it, I've got to just go with Silvari as the actual 205er. A lot of what Impa Kasanganay does is like, all right, I'm a better athlete than you. What are you going to do about it? Nothing? Okay, then I'm going to win. And Silvaria is probably not quite the same level of athlete, but he's bigger. He's athletic. He's got a pretty solid game. He's American. This is American Top Team versus Killcliff. That's always fun. They're both going to be prepared. They're both going to know their opponent. They're both going to deal with their stuff. And Silvari is also a finisher, and a mean finisher. Yeah, I'm going to go with him to defeat Impa Kasanganay. TKO or even submission are both on the table because it's not like Josh Silvaria doesn't have submission ability. I know his recent run has been more TKOs, Ty Flores, Delon Monte, although that was by injury, Martin Hamlet. But before that, there's a lot of submissions there. There's a very good rear naked choke game. And yeah, I don't know. This one's fun though. This is my fight of the night because I think there's something very inherently very interesting between these two good athletes, and let's see what happens. So there you go. Also, Kasanganay does have a tendency to run into like really cool knockouts. I guess that's an extra one. Kasanganay is the favorite. I'm guessing that's just the former UFC fighter bump because I don't really see why. And I don't even mean like I'm picking him. I just mean like in general, it's like, okay, what do you expect him to do? I mean, be athletic? I don't know, I guess. Minus 175 to minus 200. I will probably be all over. What's Bets 365 got? Bet 365 doesn't have anything for this one. Ugh. You have to do FanDuel. I'm gonna have to do FanDuel, which is fine because that actually opens up the Pacheco bet. So plus 148 for Silvaria. I'm all over that. There are better lines. He goes up to like a plus 165 if you want to shop around. Then we get some non-tournament final fights. Kayla Harrison is going to beat up Aspen Ladd. I don't trust Aspen Ladd. Her weight cutting has been questionable. Her game has always been kind of questionable on top of that. Her mental toughness is a little bit questionable, and her whole relationship with her corner is questionable. There's just so many questions there. There's enough physicality and some technical ability to like do well, but like at featherweight, she's gonna be small. Harrison should roll her. Derek Brunson will probably defeat Ray Cooper III at a middleweight bout because Ray Cooper III shouldn't be a middleweight. That's kind of A. And Brunson's also looking jacked. He is on the good supplements. Jesus Pinedo versus Gabriel Alves Braga. I have never been able to get a handle on either of these fighters. Honestly, they're both kind of messes. Pinedo is super tall for the division. They fought once before. It was a split decision 7 months ago. I have to go with Braga again to win the fight just because of that. He is the favorite. It is a near betting line, near even money line. In fact, you can get Braga at plus 100 on Caesars apparently, and Jesus Pinedo at minus 120. Interesting. So you can find Braga at underdog odds, which is weird because he's the favorite on most of these lines, but like it's even money. So if you have any like strong feelings on this fight, go with them, I guess. Biagio Ali Walsh will probably win his amateur fight because that is what they do. Bubba Jenkins, Chris Wade. I'm going with Bubba Jenkins to win this fight. This is the third time this fight has happened. Are they only listing that this is two? Did they not fight 3 times? I am very certain that they fought 3 times. Yeah, they did. Chris Wade won the first one, Jenkins the second one. I'm going with Jenkins. He's always had the higher ceiling, and I don't really know anything about Kai Wu versus Phil Caracappa and Jesse Stern versus Josh Blinden. I have seen Jesse Stern a couple times, but like every time I've seen him, he's lost. Like I saw him get submitted by Pat Sabatini at CFFC 91, not live or anything, but I've seen that card. I've seen him lose twice in the PFL. There you go. He's coming off a win over Ryan McDonald. Ryan McDonald is not terrible. Former UFC fighter, although a very bad UFC fighter at some promotion called Art of Scrap. I have never come across this Art of Scrap promotion. I need to add that to my simulator. Anyways, that is the fight card. Is it amazing? No. Is it cool? Is there something interesting there? Yeah, I think if you haven't tried a PFL card, take a look at it. The Smart Cage is to me interesting. Don't get me wrong, it's super nerdy, but this is the number 2 promotion in American MMA right now. And if we want to fix some of the things about UFC's monopolistic powers, the easiest way actually is to develop a competitor to them. And we'll get into that later because we got the antitrust talk coming up. All right. So if you're here for just fight picks, you might want to tune out now. Check out the Discord. Check out the Fight Simulator. Links down below. Boom, boom, boom. There you go. But now we're going to get into business talk. The merger between, or not, I mean, it is essentially a merger between PFL and Bellator. Essentially, PFL has acquired Bellator for stock purchase. What that means is that zero money changed hands. Basically, Paramount, the owners of Bellator, receive stock in PFL in exchange for giving over their 200 some odd roster. And this is the best roster outside of the UFC now, unquestionably. That being said, PFL is going to do some weird things. Apparently, there are some business deals that Bellator had that they're going to have to maintain. And this is going to lead to Bellator running as its own separate entity for 2024 for eight fight events. I'm not super excited for that because that's just Bellator with like an even more depressive atmosphere. And PFL could have used the fighters now because the problem with the PFL tournament is largely that there is not enough people at any weight to put together a really good tournament. Like like the 205 was a great example that it's like, man, we got Sam Key in here. He's not going to beat anybody. And that's kind of this, like there is that version of that guy in every single weight class they have. So bringing in the Bellator weight classes, roster, I should say, probably would have been a big help. Would have been a massive help to actually put together a decent, like season-long deal, and they're not going to do that. So obviously the way they're going to proceed forward is not something I'm a fan of. Eventually what this will probably do is lead to a larger PFL roster, which will put on better fight cards, more comparable to the UFC on the low end, like fight night, not pay-per-view. And we'll get like better fights. That being said, there is an angle of this that is bad for the fighters because before, if you became a free agent or you were looking to make your dip into the big international American-based scene, you had 3 doors to knock on. You had PFL, you had Bellator, and you had the UFC. There was some negotiating power, not a lot. We'll talk about that more with the antitrust, not a lot. But there was, particularly for ex-UFC fighters, a way to cash in and make some decent money. Now there's only one place to do that with, and that is PFL. Unless you want to go across to Europe and like you can get some decent money deals in like KSW or one over in Asia. But if you want to stay in the United States, you now have only one option to go to, and that means less fighters are going to get that option. Because inevitably, PFL is losing money. And Bellator was losing money because you do not do a stock sale of your company if you're making money. There is... and it was hilarious because there was like some product excuses. Bellator is going to go for like 500 million. No. Anyways, I think PFL, I think did the right thing here. Like you get a stock purchase on 200 fighters. Yeah, sure. Go ahead, do it. It deepens your roster. It gives you a lot of tools to possibly find your way to, making that Saudi Arabian money work and actually make money as opposed to being a money pit. But the truth of the matter is that only the UFC, globally speaking, makes money, and that is the case of MMA right now. So I guess it's a big nothing burger. If you're not familiar with a stock sale, you can read up on that, but it's basically what I described. The former owners of Bellator get stock in the new company in exchange for basically merging their companies. That is essentially it. It could lead to some big fights. Specifically, Chris Cyborg versus Kayla Harrison or Larissa Pacheco. Hopefully both. Because those are the only 3 people really I want to see fight each other in terms of like women's 145. And obviously you've got some options now. Let's see here. I have the PFL finalists handy. Let's have a look here. Although I have found my way onto Art of Scrap. Anyways. Yeah, I mean, you can obviously do something with the heavyweights. Magomed Kirimov versus Jason Jackson. That could be a fun fight. Sadabusi versus Jason Jackson. That's also a reasonably fun fight. You've also got 205 with Josh Silvaria, particularly. Kasangan, I think, just gets run over by like Vadim Nemkov. I think they both do. But like Silvara versus Nemkov, that's pretty fun. There's some potential there. You've got Derek Brunson versus Johnny Eblam. I guess would be a good fight to set up because Brunson signed with PFL recently. We kind of know where Brunson fits into the grand scheme of things versus like the elite of the UFC because he fought them. And you have him go out there. You have him fight Johnny Eblam, probably the best middleweight outside of the UFC, and we see what happens. So that's cool. That's fun. Bantamweight and featherweight will just continue to be fun. Bellator had pretty good divisions there. And yeah. That's about it. You know, it's better for fight quality, but it's probably worse for the fighters in terms of competitive free agency. Let's get on to the UFC Anti Trust lawsuit. Basically, it's moving forward. It seems to be going against the UFC. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get into the specific technical details of it. I am going to talk mostly finance. But if you want a full briefing on the legal side of things, Erik Magraken over on Twitter is your man. Also, Kareem Zidane. There you go. I was blanking on the name there. And John Nash of Bloody Elbow have both been doing a lot of coverage on this. They are also people that are, if you want to get familiar with this, people you need to get familiar with and check out their reporting on the matter. And let's get into it. So what I'm going to do here really is I'm going to look at some of the more ridiculous takes I've seen on Twitter. Now, these are, I don't know how pervasive these are or whatever. This is just stuff that I'm seeing and like in multiple places, people trying to make the argument. So there is a large scale argument here of UFC defense that the UFC monopoly is good for the sport. And I can see arguments for this. Obviously, if the UFC held a monopoly and effectively did it to make best fighter versus best fighter constantly, we would have the best fight quality possible. Like obviously, that's the case. If you have the ability to sign all the best fighters in the world, which UFC does, and you're interested in making the best fights possible, you would have amazing things. Like obviously, it would be a centralized actual world title. None of this bullcrap. But let's be honest, the UFC has that power right now. They are the only profitable MMA promotion in the world, large scale. I'm sure there's some regional promotions that turn a profit. But globally successful promotions, UFC stands alone. They stand on top of the mountain, unquestionable monopoly power, which is the power to influence the wage market in a significant way. Not monopoly in the sense of solo, but like functional monopoly. And with this power, they do not give us the best versus the best. Case in point, Francis Ngannou leaving the UFC. Case in point, there are guys in Bellator, particularly, and in one, that are considered potentially, big air quotes, big maybe, some of the best fighters in the world at their weight classes. Like realistically speaking, if we like Bellator has Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson. Mighty Mouse Johnson, when they got him, was the best flyweight in the world at the time. He was not in the UFC because the UFC let him go because the UFC wasn't interested in promoting him. Because the UFC, and I say this repetitively, is not interested in fight quality. That is not their goal. Their goal is not the best fighting the best. Their goal, and to be clear, I'm not judging on this, their goal is to be as profitable as possible. They are a business, they are run like a business, etc. So them having the monopoly never meant we were going to get the best versus the best. Because unless that makes business sense, and it often doesn't because let's face it, who makes massive money in the UFC? It's still freaking Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier with no title on the line, and Conor being clearly kind of washed, still was a massive fight both times they did it in the second and third fight. And Conor McGregor's comeback fight now from years on the shelf and no idea if he's good anymore. No idea. And like no idea if he's even serious about it because you look at his body and it's like, that's going to be a heck of a weight cut. Like that, there was the moment on Tough when he was like next to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who is a weight class above him, 2 weight classes above where Conor McGregor was actually best in the world, 145. And it's like, how are you even going to make weight? And then of course the constant dodging of Chandler and like it's ridiculous. Like it's kind of the sad thing is of course that MMA has always had more of an entertainment aspect to it than an actual sport aspect to it. Like we don't boo and hiss. Well, we do, but we don't. Very few hardcore football fans American gridiron football fans won't watch the Super Bowl. It could be two of the most boring teams, two teams that you hate, and you're still going to be there on that Sunday watching the game. The ratings prove this. You're still going to do that with the NBA Finals. You're still going to do that with the World Series. MMA has never had that level because Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson, who is amazing, never drew. So the idea that, like, if you just let the UFC do its thing, we'll get the best versus the best consistently is bollocks. We're getting Colby Covington getting a title shot off of the couch. We're probably going to get Conor McGregor in a title fight before long, even if he doesn't win a fight in the next year. And also just on the name of fairness, I'm not a big anti-PED guy. I don't hold the positive PED test against Cyborg overly or Josh Barnett or whatever, because to be honest, I don't think it matters. We don't know who's clean. But the fact that the UFC is, willing to completely let Conor McGregor and terminate the USADA agreement so Conor can 100% juice is also a bit ridiculous on a sport level. So there you go. Debate number one. The UFC monopoly is good for the sport. No, not really. Fighter pay is going to stay down. The best are not going to fight the best. The UFC is going to do what they want to do. The UFC is going to bully it around. The UFC is not going to advance the quality of fighters because they're going to keep fighter pay down. And we're going to continue to, it's going to be continued the case that, if you're a really, really good athlete, you do anything but fighting. Even if the money was equal, I think that would probably be the case. But okay, I can go and make pennies and get serious head trauma. No, thank you. Okay, number two. The UFC monopoly is good for fighters. This is ridiculous. This is a business 101. If one business controls the entire labor pool at the high end, it is not good for the labor pool in any way, shape, or form. I had a guy who was constantly arguing. I forget if it was Erik Magraken or if it was Mike Russell's tweet about single fight deals. No longer having a 4-fight deal with the UFC, 6-fight deal with the UFC. You have a 1-fight deal with the UFC, and then they re-sign you afterwards, and or you go out in free agency. And there was someone who was constantly trying to argue that this was actually worse for fighters because, if you sign a 6-fight deal with the UFC right now, you have a nice guarantee of 6 fights. You don't. The UFC contracts are terminatable at the UFC's will. Now, they don't do it a lot because, let's face it, if you sign someone with all the negotiation power at the table for a certain amount of money, you're probably entirely fine giving them the full contract. The UFC sees a guy from Dana White Contender Series and is like, hey, 4-fight deal, 10,000. Take it, leave it. You take it? Okay. We'll probably give you the 4 fights because, let's face it, at 10 grand, even if you're terrible, you're a warm body to throw on a fight night card. And then, it's only when you have some idea of getting more than 10 grand that we're going to get rid of you. Cause the UFC signed Shannon Ross. I hate to do this. I hate to do this because as far as I know, Shannon Ross is a really nice guy or whatever. But he was the moment on the Dana White Contender Series where I'm like, this guy shouldn't be on the Contender Series. Oh, we signed him. He lost on the Contender Series and we signed him. Oh my God. He's just not good. If you don't know who Shannon Ross is, I don't blame you. Anyways, continuing on. The idea that these fans exist in a world where the UFC is bound to honor their contracts, and they're not. And if they had to sign 1-fight deals, why wouldn't they re-sign people? At some point, the UFC has to have the best fighters in the world to be the best fight place. That's the case. There are not many fighters or fight fans who, when robbed of the idea that they have the best fighters, would still hold the UFC at the top of the mountain. Like, the UFC is at the top of the mountain because they have the best fighters. And if they lose that via being like, oh, we actually don't want to pay Israel Adesanya. Okay, he's gone. We don't want to pay Leon Edwards. Okay, he's gone. We don't want to pay Aljamain Sterling. And to be honest, they would actually maybe let Aljamain Sterling go. But they would depart. And obviously, the lack of competition means that the fighter pay doesn't go up because there's no business reason to go up. Which brings me to like number 3, which is the UFC is the way it is because it makes business sense. This one I'm actually going to more or less say is solid. Like, if you want to defend the UFC, this is your angle. The UFC makes a lot of money. No one else does. Who are we to challenge the way they do business? And it's true. I have no concrete reason for why the UFC should pay their fighters more. I really don't. I can think of reasons why it would be better for fighters and why it would be better for fight quality, obviously. Because if you pay the fighters more, you'd actually have full-time fighters. Because that's the case of like half the UFC roster is like part-time fighters. They are fighting in the biggest promotion in the world in front of the most people while still being like a drywaller or a contractor or a garbage pickup guy. Like they all have day jobs because frankly, UFC pay is not enough. Like if you are a Dana White Contender Series fighter, you sign your 4-fight deal. Let's say you get all 4 fights in 1 year. And let's say you win them all, but you don't get a performance bonus because, like, let's be honest, you can't think of that. You have made, drumroll, 80 grand. That is slightly above, and that's gross pay before we get into the whole fact that fighters sometimes do face double taxation depending on where the fights are. Number 2, the fact that a percentage of that is going to your coaches, a percentage of that is going to your manager, a percentage is going to your trainer, your like strength and conditioning coach. A percentage is going to your cornermen. A percentage is going to probably some secondary manager, maybe who deals with like sponsorships and stuff. And also the UFC fighter like fight kit deal pretty much precludes you from actually getting any kind of sponsorship, realistically speaking, that is actually going to pay you decent money. So let's say you made 100 grand. By the time it gets back to you and it's like everyone's taken their piece, because this is something I think that I don't know why this gets ignored constantly. And I've said this before about fighter pay. You have the fighter pay, the listed purse, but you realize that coaches make money off of fighters. You realize that managers, Ali Abdelaziz, the Kawa brothers, Uriah Faber, etc., make money off the fighters. They essentially support the promoters, the coaches, the trainers, the managers. All of those businesses essentially are supported by the fighter pay. Not directly with the promoters, but everybody else is making the money. So the idea that like UFC fighters are living large, and some will try to argue they are. Jake Matthews, shout out to a proper corporate stooge, Jake Matthews. Will try to argue that they are, and in some cases they are. Like, don't get me wrong. Depending on where you live, you can make that go a long way. But nah, not really. And there's also, of course, the inevitable medical consequences of being a fighter. CTE being first and foremost, but like also bad knees, bad back, degenerative injuries in general are fairly common in retired MMA fighters. Among other athletes. These are not unique to MMA by any means, but like the difference is even being a practice roster guy in the NFL probably is going to pay you more. And also, you probably actually went to college. Through your athletic prowess, got a piece of paper that says you're capable of doing something. Anyways, okay, that's the end of that one. The monopoly is not good for fighters. There you go. Boom. And then the final one we're to talk about is that, well, if the antitrust lawsuit goes through, we're going to have the same problem as boxing. That's not true. Don't get me wrong. I can see the mental connections there. I get it. But the reason that boxing is as diluted as it is structural. Like it doesn't have anything to do with boxers making a lot of money. Because that tends to be the defense. It's like, well, boxers make a lot of money and boxing is like a mess. Boxing is a mess because you have the WBA, you have the IBF, you have all these different sanctioning bodies that have like a case for the world champion that you can just sort of avoid the actual best fighters and skate your way to being like, I'm a world champion. I haven't beaten anybody. I haven't beaten these other like 4 guys who are also claiming to be world champion, but I'm the world champion. And as long as there's no other like belt, as long as there's no other effective world champion, the UFC, assuming it isn't paying like way less than a rival, is still going to have a fairly solid supply. It's still going to have a pretty solid percentage of like the top 50 fighters at every weight class in the world. And you're still like, if the antitrust lawsuit goes really against the UFC, they sign a big settlement, they have to change how they do contracts or whatever, they're still going to have more or less the same roster. Like that roster is going to be making more money. But even if you double the money, that's a 28% based on the most recent figures for the UFC in terms of fighter pay. Even if we use the average of 17%, that brings us up to 34%. The UFC would still be insanely profitable and still the only profitable business in MMA. The only profitable one. You would still have a fairly collection of world-class fighters fighting each other on UFC cards almost every week. And yeah, it wouldn't overnight turn into boxing. I mean, I guess you could argue that long-term it could end up being boxing. Long-term problem if a bunch of promotions get in there. But if that's the case, then just, vote with your wallets. Go watch the best fight the best. And we won't have like years and years of runaway like dilution. I mean, we're getting diluted anyways. Like UFC fighter pay has to go up if we're gonna have like top-notch cards in general. Like that's the thing is like people keep arguing with like, boxing is bad. Well, the UFC slowly becomes like boxing. Here is a pay-per-view card with one decent fight on it. We're better than boxing. Are you? I mean, I guess that's the problem with like almost every argument in defense of the UFC is it just creates goals that the UFC doesn't have. The UFC is here to make money. That's the goal. That's the only goal. There were other goals. I'm going to say nice things about Dana White and the Fertitta brothers here to finish it off. When they were in charge, I believe that there were actually other goals. Making money was still a goal. I'm not saying they weren't interested in getting rich, but they were interested in growing the product. They had a passion for it. The ownership now doesn't. It is a proper corporation now that wants to make money, and that is it. And every UFC defender is trying to give them this benefit of a doubt that they have some hidden mission to make the sport better and fight quality and wow us. And they care about the fans. They don't. They care about your wallet. Anyways, I hope that was entirely uninsightful, to be honest. I hope everyone had reached those conclusions on their own. With that said, have a good day. Have a happy Thanksgiving if you're American. Celebrating it at the wrong time because I'm Canadian. And check out the links down below. We got I'll be doing some fights this weekend on the simulator. It'll be Discord MMA 3 and the finals of the Discord 3 of the Discord first ever heavyweight Grand Prix. Let's go. Let's get excited.